You want mine?
No, that's fine. I've got it written out anyway, so. It's 4:05, so we should call the meeting to order. Ed, Judy, and myself are here. Can we have a motion to accept the agenda?
So moved.
A second.
All in favor?
All right.
And then we have public announcements, comments. So Judy Largan.
You can come up and help Mom.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, I'm Julie Larson. I'm a parent here in the district of the 2 boys that are at the Heritage Elementary School. And this one too.
Can I have just 1 second?
Yes, go ahead.
The dog ate my hearing aids.
Oh. Do you want me to do this? I don't know if I-
I'm just asking, just if you could
Okay.
speak to the projection
Sometimes
a
it's
lot.
easier to see what people are saying
Yeah,
without a
yeah.
mask on. Okay. I don't want to look down on the SEL learning or anything. I'm just wanting to learn a lot about it, and I have some concerns, some questions, and there's so much I'm trying to figure out right now about that curriculum. But I wanted to bring up my experience with the recent SEL survey that is being done by 3rd graders. I was sent an email informing me that this survey would be taking place, which I appreciated. Then I emailed my son's teacher saying that we wanted to opt out of that just because I didn't know much about it. She directed me to the link at the bottom of the email, and the link was kind of hard for me to find. And then she also told me if I had any more questions about it, I could talk to the school psychologist and the guidance counselor. The school psychologist did send me the actual survey questions at my request. That was not disclosed on the original email to the parents. She actually did not answer my question about whether or not parents would be informed of the results of the survey. I really hope that maybe in the future y'all would put that survey on that initial email so that parents could make more informed decision about what we would like our kids to do. I also like the idea of having more of an opt-in approach to the surveys versus opt-out. So presenting the information to the parents, them deciding if it's appropriate for them or for their kids. And then we can say, hey, we want this. We want our kids to take the survey. Now to get to the questions that were on it, when I looked at it, some of them seemed, totally okay. Such as I help my friends when they're having a problem, and I try to think about how others feel. Other ones I had some concerns about. I make others afraid of me. I think bad things will happen to me, and I say things to hurt people's feelings. I think that these questions would be appropriate maybe in a different setting, maybe in more of like a clinical setting, where kids need to be evaluated that way. But I don't think that this is appropriate, especially without full transparency and consent of the parents. Lastly, I went to the CASEL.org, which is the research that is listed that they sent me to look at, that was used to kind of come up with the curriculum, I think. I might be wrong on that. When I looked at it, I just saw quite a bit about prejudices, biases, that word inequities, equitable solutions, and just things that I didn't really think needed to be included in the SEL curriculum. And I don't know if that's the direction that it's going or not. I just think this is some of the things that were on that website. So I think that's all that I have. Thank you.
No others. Okay. Thank you. That takes us to student progress update, SEL.
Okay, and we have, for this topic, we're joined by Chris Mann, who's our Director of Student Services, and she has brought some of our pupil services team. We have Kristen Thompson, one of our school psychologists, Alyssa Penny, one of our internal coaches, and Rose Nadler, one of our social workers.
Alyssa is also a fourth grade teacher at Heritage.
Yes. Yes.
Well, thank you. We're excited to be here today. I'm excited to come back to the curriculum committee and want to thank you for moving the RFP forward, because great news, we started that partnership with Psychotherapy Center of Waunakee this week. So thank you for your efforts in moving that forward. I appreciate that. Today, we want to talk about SEL, but also just overall our school mental health framework. And Rebecca, can you pull up that PowerPoint? So today's outcomes, really hoping to talk about the Waunakee Community School District mental health framework and how that aligns with the Wisconsin School Mental Health Framework. Talk about those universal practices. You heard a little bit about concerns with SEL, that falls under universal, those selected services and intense supports that we're offering in our district. And then develop an understanding really of how we're addressing social, emotional, and mental health needs, and how we and where students and families can get help. The school mental health framework, the state one, is not new to this committee. We talked about this, and this is shared during our meeting for the RFP and the partnership with Psychotherapy Center of Waunakee. So what I'd like to do is kind of go through the school mental health framework, the state one, and then go back through the levels and talk about what we're doing in Waunakee at those different levels. But really what you'll notice with this framework is that it is a continuum of different supports and programming that vary in intensity. So beginning at that universal level and then continuing on to meet the needs of all learners once you get up into that view category where they're more intense. So on the next slide, you'll see broke down those levels. So that universal level is really what we're talking about with universal practices, is creating positive school and classroom environments, focusing on relationship building, connectedness, just overall practices that are good for all students. Selected, when you move up into that selected, that's for some students that need a little bit more support. And it might look like individual or small group work. It might look like we're doing more checking in and checking out, or we're screening kids and following up on those screeners. We're trying to be very proactive with kids and trying to address problems before they get really big. So we have for some supports, and we're working with families and students and sometimes community providers in that area. Yes.
So bullet 3 says these trauma-site sensitive practices. Are all our teachers trained in that, or just some?
I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a
Okay,
bit.
thank
Actually,
you.
we did do that 5 years ago. Our teachers were
Right.
trained in that. But I'm going to talk more about how we're expanding that in a
Thank
bit.
you.
The intensive supports is very individualized, and it's based on needs. Most times this is very wraparound and collaborative with outside partners and families. So that's the intensive supports that we have few students that need that more intense support. So on the next slide, before I go into what we're doing in Waunakee at each of those levels, I wanted to just bring up a couple of things that are important to note because they've kind of driven our direction around this work. The first is in fall 2019, so this is pre-COVID, we had a mental health coordinator who helped facilitate a mental health needs assessment. It's a DPI tool. We did this at all 6 of our schools. So we had 6 school teams. She met with them and we worked through the mental health needs assessment. And what we learned from that was all 6 school teams indicated that we need more around weaving in SEL practices into our everyday work with kids. That came out loud and clear from all 6 schools. So as a result, we did form a committee that looked at those DPI SEL standards, and I'm going to talk more about those, and really kind of explored what are we doing with social emotional learning and how can we move our district forward in that work. In addition to that, we learned at the high school level that we were lacking some collaborative partnerships and some more additional mental health services for kids in need. And so we are addressing that as well, more of those top tier type levels, but also doing more proactive and preventative work at the high school level. Some other things to note is the Dane County Youth Assessment data, which is done every 3 years. We did that last February. Our kids were hybrid, so we actually had them do it virtually, and we didn't have that great of a turnout on that. So this year, we're going to do the Wisconsin Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which is very much like the Dane County Youth Assessment, but we don't have to wait another 3 years to get that data. We want to know where kids are at mentally, with their mental health, with their alcohol and drug use. Like, we just want to look at that picture now that we have kids back 5 days after 18 months of a pandemic, want to know where they're at. So we'll have more information on that, because that will be coming hopefully this month. Well, the survey's done this month. We won't actually have results for quite some time, but we're doing that survey this month. The SSI SSEL plus mental health screener, you heard a little bit about from the public comment. That is something we have done in grades 3, 5, 7, 9. We just initiated that last week, and then it's also happening this week in some buildings. So we don't have data yet from that, but we will most likely have that data relatively soon to see how our students are doing around SEL. And then there's that mental health component so that we can address individual mental health concerns that might have come up through that screener. And then I just wanted to point out that our strategic plan does have student social emotional learning identified as a priority area, and that's been for some time. That was in there before I was here. This is my 3rd year. I don't know how long it's social emotional learning has been identified as a priority area, but it has been for several years now.
On that survey that we've heard about that you have up here, is that done anonymously or?
Nope, that one is tied to students because it has, as she mentioned, some of those questions have internalizing and externalizing mental health questions that would flag us to reach out and learn more to see if they need additional support.
Thank you.
So those are a couple things to keep in mind as we talk about what we're doing here at all different levels. So the universal practices. So we have a couple things going on. We have positive behavior interventions and supports, which has been in place for years. That is really making sure we're teaching expectations of kids and what is expected behavior in different environments, like the lunchroom or their classroom or their hallway, their bus. So that has been an important piece and something that's been in place here for a long time. The trauma-sensitive schools approach. So Mark, you had asked about this. About 5 years ago, I believe we had 2 trainers that trained the entire district in trauma-sensitive schools. Those 2 trainers have since retired. I came into the district 3 years ago as a trauma trainer, so I'm the sole trainer right now. But we will be expanding that. We are going to have by the end of the year a trainer in each building and 2 at the high school level to keep that work going forward. And I'm going to talk more about how we're doing that in a bit. Under universal practices, we also are doing a lot with the collaborative and proactive solutions. Dr. Ross Green, his philosophy is really kids do well if they can. And if they're not doing well, if they're struggling, what is that lagging skill? How can we teach those skills and help kids be successful? So that's something we've had some training on and have been utilizing as well in our schools universally. We've been doing those community circles. At the intermediate school, it's connect time. At the secondary level, it's advisory. Those are where we're focusing on relationships and connectedness and that belonging and creating those safe spaces, which is a lot of the work that we're doing around developmental designs, which I'll speak to a little bit more as well. And then a last universal practice is that screener, the SSIS, that we're doing at 3, 5, 7, and 9 to assess skills in those DPI, social emotional competency areas that we can address as a whole, and then also having kids who might flag with a mental health concern that we can follow up with their families and that's those students individually. So that's universal. But since I'm talking about SEL, I thought we should probably put a little more time into SEL since that seems to be a topic that comes up quite a bit. So this is the CASEL definition. The CASEL stands for Collaborative for Academic Social and Emotional Learning. And so it's a very long definition. I don't want to read it to you, but if I had to summarize this, it is we teach people skills. We teach how we feel and recognize our feelings and are self-aware about our feelings and how we relate to others and how we interact with others. That's what we see as SEL. That's the definition of SEL and kind of in a summary. So there's a couple of things I think around that need to be cleared up too, as well as around social emotional learning. So there's CASEL that the definition came from. The CASEL framework has 5 domains: relationship skills, social awareness, self-awareness, self-management, and responsible decision-making. Those are CASEL's domains. DPI has come out with their social emotional competencies a few years back, and their 3 domains are emotional development, self-concept, and social competence. So although those are different with DPI, they actually based it off the Castle framework, and so it encompasses all of those 5 frameworks from Castle, but they only have those 3 listed competency or domains. So that's just kind of, that got a little confusing for people, like there's a Castle domains and then there's the DPI domains, and what are we looking at and what are we using? So we use a little bit of both, as you'll see when we talk more about those universal practices and lessons. And then I put in their developmental designs. This is really the approach. It's not a curriculum. It's really an approach as to how do we teach, model, rehearse those SEL skills and allow that to happen in our classrooms every day. And we'll talk a little bit more. I'll have Alyssa and Rose share some examples of that. SEL is not a new thing in Waunakee, and I just wanted to kind of bring us back. I wasn't here for this history, but my understanding is that we had character education. That's what we called SEL back in the day. And then we utilized a program called Tribes. We've been using community circles for some time, and then I heard that we had an education for employment class that used to be way back in the day. SEL has kind of evolved, and it's really now aligning more with mental wellness, and is almost viewed as a toolbox for classroom and behavior management by teaching things like self-monitoring our emotions or empathy and acceptance. So it's really kind of maybe shifted over time, but it's still been around for a while. Recently, DPI took those SEL competencies and they crosswalked them with employability skills, because we have been hearing for many years from employers that they've cited that importance of having strong social emotional skills and those people skills in the workforce. All right, so this is an example of universal practices at the elementary level. So what we've done this year is we have taken those 5 Castle domains you'll notice under SEL domains, and elementary is focused on self-awareness those first 7 weeks of school, and then you'll see the DPI competencies under that. Now we're shifting into self-management. I'll let Alyssa just share a little bit of a summary of some of the work that's going on at the elementary level around this. As an internal coach, she leads a lot of the universal practices that includes SEL, but also includes all those other things I mentioned.
Perfect. So the internal coaches we pull together periodically we did this work over the summer, and then kind of breaking it apart, much like you would a pacing of a curriculum, the educational side of it, and just looking at spreading those competencies across the year. And in addition to what we do in the classroom as teachers, we're also educating and gaining our adult SEL with our staff at our buildings as well. So we're developing that PD for our teachers at our school, and then weaving that into our classrooms through our community circles. So for example, the very first one is identifying your emotions. And as a classroom teacher, how I do that is first thing in the morning, we come together, we greet each other, and it kind of sets the tone for the day. It's predictable. It feels safe because everyone is included, and we start to talk about our emotions, and weaving that into like when we read our books and kind of identifying that, because that's kind of the foundation for a lot of these skills as they progress. And you'll see that we have kind of paced it out throughout the school year, trying to help teachers try to weave that in throughout their day, not just in the community circle, because that's how we start our day, but then how else can we seamlessly add that throughout our day with the students.
So we've had concern from some in the community about the amount of time spent on this versus academic. So let's split up here. Looks really good. Is it something that happens every day? If so, about how much time? I know there's teachable moments too where it will be integrated.
Yep.
But for just a portion of the teaching portion and trying to embed the core values, about how much time would you say is spent?
It's a great question. So the bell rings at 7:40,
Yep.
and shortly after that, in my my 4th grade role, we come right to the circle to start our greeting right away, because our students go to specials right at 8 o'clock. So I have a really short amount of time, about that 20 minutes, to do the greeting and the sharing. There's different components of that community circle. And then you're right, I do weave it in throughout the day. And then at the end of the day, we kind of end with a reflection, kind of wrapping it and kind of connecting it back up to whatever that goal was for that beginning.
I think like weaving it into the day, it might be, I'm reading a book, right? And oh, how do you think that character felt? What do you read on their face, their emotions? That's like weaving it in as part of those conversations and work. Yeah.
And thinking about different perspectives as you read a book. I'm thinking of a book that's coming up in our Making Meaning, seeing how different people saw a situation a different way and how that plays out to us in the playground when we're playing.
What do they play?
I'm trying to think of the game that they play in the Gaga Ball. Yes, Gaga Ball is a big thing where we have to identify our emotions and take different perspectives. So, which comes back to the classroom. So trying to like set that up and learn from those books that we already have built into our teaching day, and how do we, again, help with those people skills.
So incorporate it with the curriculum.
And separately, can I add a little piece to that? So for example, at the intermediate school last year, we had the 20 minutes or so one day a week, and that was great. But this year, because of everything that's happened, we are doing it every morning. And kind of that time piece where I see that really playing in is I call it like a soft landing to the day for students. They can come in. What happened before is they would come in, they'd walk in the door, put your things away. We're going to start math. Here we go. And kids weren't ready yet. They just needed a minute to settle in, be part of their classroom, and get ready for the day. And now we have a chance to do that. They can look at their schedule. Okay, what have we got going here for the day? What kinds of things are we going to need? Are we all welcomed and feeling comfortable and situated for the day? So yes, it's like 20 minutes long, but then their productivity after that is much better than trying to just, okay, come in, let's get going. So it is a little bit of time, but it pays off hugely in other ways.
So I was going to ask on, so we're bringing the emotion factor into it, which obviously impacts everyone you start with. So is it in a sense of you're bringing up these emotions? Are we trying to be empathetic about it? Are you trying to gain where each kid's at, and then that impacts them throughout the day, the week? What, I mean, I'm trying to.
Yeah, I think it's that. And if you share one day that you're feeling sad because this happened, I can connect with you as a teacher, or the other kids can say, oh gosh, he's feeling really sad today because this is what happened to his football game, whatever it may be. I can be empathetic, and I said, you know what, he's gonna need some extra pats on the back today, or maybe when I'm his partner, I can kind of really help build him up. It builds that community, that classroom community. That's so important.
But I would also add, it's teaching kids how to recognize, and I know it's hard with masks sometimes, but how to recognize other kids where they're at and also reflect on their own, like, well, how am I doing today? But being able to recognize in others, because reading each other's body language, especially when there's a conflict we're working through or having a problem at recess, is important. And so how do we teach kids how to relate to each other, how to have empathy, how to problem solve when you're in a conflict and you disagree? We need the skills as adults right now too. Like, this is important work. So that's where it starts. And then as you'll see, we're going to talk about middle and high school, like it continues then to lay that foundation for kids to have those people skills as they get older.
Talks about setting goals too. So in thinking about a growth mindset. So, and I use that in academic and in our social emotional. Like, I've got an academic goal I want to work on because I want to grow as a learner. So we talk that through, and then we give them those tools and those strategies of how to use that growth mindset when things get hard, to help them persevere through that too.
And perspective taking, and the idea that we all have strengths, we all have weaknesses. It's okay if I'm not as good at something, and here's how I might work on it, but here are the things I am really good at. And knowing how to like recognize that in ourselves and in the people around us, which it just adds to the way they are interacting with each other on a day-to-day basis. And those are the things that are going to pay off. We'll even say things even to the 5th and 6th graders like, okay, when you get a job at, Papa Murphy's or whatever, what are the things you're gonna need to, know how to do when you move into your career? What are those things? Yes, there's, some math and reading, of course, but they're gonna need to know how to be on time, how to get along with their boss, how to handle things that are frustrating to them, how to do things they maybe don't wanna do. Those are all important skills to be working on, even as fifth and sixth graders, as they're moving forward to build those skills so they're really strong and ready when they move out.
Continue. Okay, the next slide is the universal practices. This is an example of a middle and high school. They took a little bit of a different approach. Instead of starting with self-awareness this year, we focused on relationship skills. That was something they felt was where we needed to start. Bringing back the kids 5 days a week, we really need to reestablish relationships. And Rose, if you want to share any examples or a little bit of summary of the work.
Sure.
at the high
So
school?
it's, what we're doing at the middle and high school is very similar to elementary. Because we really wanted to create that continuity so that by the time kids get to high school, when we talk about advisory and SEL, it's familiar language to them. So similarly, we kind of broke it up into themes every 2 months. And what you see here is the first page of our big year one timeline. So similar to what they did at the elementary level, all of the CASEL competencies, we went through and kind of figured out where each DPI competency fit into there. And then we really kind of have 3 focuses. Tim's gonna correct.
Good.
Tim will correct.
Well,
Yeah.
so clearly grammar is not a part of SEL. So we do a lot of staff preparation and staff meetings. So for instance, relationship skills was our first theme. So in our first staff meeting, we spent a lot of time doing kind of relationship building things. And that can be as simple as icebreakers or inclusion questions that you might do anyway, but really kind of drawing attention and making those things intentional. And this was 1, modeling it for staff, and then 2, allowing staff to kind of practice themselves. The second way, our second focus of SEL has been advisory lessons. So that's how at the middle and high school, that's our equivalent of morning circles. And that's the first day of every week, typically Monday, and that's just a half an hour. And that is structured based on developmental designs, and it kind of has a 4-part structure where you're kind of doing an announcement, you're foreshadowing the time, you're greeting each student, you're doing some sharing, and then some sort of activity. And then really our focus this year is how we're incorporating SEL into the classroom. So actually Mark's question made me kind of preemptively think about this. Really our focus with classroom skills is what are things that teachers are already doing or that can very easily incorporate into their curriculum to just draw a little bit more attention to SEL skills. And at our staff meetings, we typically will have other staff present something they're doing in their classrooms so that teachers can see what their colleagues are doing and get a real life example. So for instance, during relationship skills, we talked a lot about in the classroom, if you're putting kids into groups. So we had a math teacher present. If you're putting kids into groups, what she does is she has role cards so that each kid has a role and kind of understands their position in that group. And maybe she spends 2 or 3 minutes at the beginning of class explaining what each role means, and then helping kids when they're in their groups kind of ground themselves in that role. So they're learning their position in that group and also how they are interacting with each other. And then they go into whatever math groups do, probably talk about foci. So our classroom skills are things that are really embedded into the curriculum. 95% of the time, there are things teachers are already doing. Teachers are already putting kids into groups. Teachers are already encouraging relationship skills and kids kind of getting to know each other in those first few weeks of school.
So moving on now, that was universal. We spent a lot of time on universal, but I do want to talk more as we move up that continuum about what we're doing around mental health as well. So those are universal practices that we do with all kids. Now we're moving into more of that selective practices and supports. So I know I put that screener as universal, but I'm putting it as selected as well, because we did the SSIS. We know that some kids have flagged maybe with an alert for like internalizing or externalizing behaviors, which could be a mental health concern. And we're following up with those students and families to create support plans if they're wanting it. Maybe they're already connected to resources outside of school and they don't need anything. But if we have a couple of options, we certainly can can look at as far as those tier 2 or selected practices. We can do individual or small groups of student services staff. We can complete an emotional regulation plan with students and their families. We can put in support plans in collaboration with outside providers that might be involved. We have new this year, which I'm going to talk a little bit about, like drop-in learning opportunities at the high school level that are led by our student services and an outside clinician around coping or stress management, things like that. So we have different things we can put in place to support kids and trying to do more of a proactive and try and help whatever that student needs at that time and the family needs. So that's selected. And then moving up into intensive support. So this, I said earlier, was very individualized and very much collaborative, I would say, and wraparound. Kids that are in intensive supports or need intensive supports might be coming back from inpatient hospitalization. They might have experienced some trauma. They might need a safety plan because they're self-harming, and they might have suicidal ideation during the day or feel like they want to self-harm. What is our plan to support that student? We may refer to building bridges. We may connect them with Psychotherapy Center of Waunakee. We might bring in a behavior consultant, but these are some strategies we've used with those more intense needs for students in those situations. Some additional updates I just thought we should share with the team because it is around mental health and social emotional wellness is that you're already aware of the Psychotherapy Center of Waunakee partnership that started this week. So that is a resource for families who are already clients, but then we certainly have that as an option for new families as well. Suicide risk assessment protocol was updated. This was started pre-COVID. We worked on it through COVID, which was good because actually we were ready to go to train our staff. All staff were trained last fall when we came back and we were semi-virtual hybrid. And so staff were able to get trained on what happens if you have a student that might have some suicidal ideation virtually and in person. How do you respond? Where do you go to get help? Our student services were all trained on how to assess and then pull in parents, make a plan, a safety plan, and move forward as quickly as possible. We also had a safety grant a few years back where we were able to have adolescent and youth mental health training, and we had 70+ staff utilize that opportunity. A few years back, it was multi-year training opportunity. Yes.
Just to the grants portion of it, Mark touched on a little bit. You heard, was it Julie that spoke? All of this like unknown. We hear about this topic and SEL. Is there anything that, because I don't know about it, all of this sounds like really good. It's aligned with mental health. Is there anything that's you feel is deceptive in some sort of way that is for reason for concern on parents that you hear about? When you say, you know, it's been around for years, but it has shifted. Okay, what has shifted mean? Was it total mental health, or is there something, you know, that they have reason to be concerned? Valid reason.
I don't have a reason to be concerned. I don't feel like we're being deceptive. SEL, I think it's more of a national platform is kind of blowing up. I mean, this is what it is. And I don't know how to earn that trust from the community or what we need to say or do, but this is around building people skills and relationship skills. And I understand Developmental Designs has a website with an equity statement. I understand they have posted resources and articles that people might not all agree on or appreciate. We're not utilizing everything from Developmental Designs. We don't like their website, actually. We were commenting it was certainly not designed by an educator. However, is there an equity component to Developmental Designs? Yes, in that equity of voice, all inclusive. We want all kids to feel a sense of belonging and included and connected. And we don't have that right now. In fact, I'm pretty sure our high school culture climate survey indicated like 24% of kids don't feel like they belong right now. So we have work to do on building those relationships, and we should know that every student feels like they have an adult to connect to, and that kids know how to handle stress, how to manage that stress, how to relate to people, how to problem solve. That's really what it is. But I think it's just kind of, you know, I don't know. I don't know what else, if anybody wants to add anything, but that's truly where I'm coming from with this is what we're doing. There's nothing hidden.
And more than ever, the idea of dealing with frustration, if there was ever a time that dealing with frustration and helping students, you know, work through some of that, and it's now. And they're such important things. And without them, kids end up feeling isolated. They end up feeling like they're the only one who's struggling. they end up just in a lot of not so great places. And talking about these things and working through this is so critical, even in an appropriate way, but with our youngest learners.
And I think that, kind of looking back, there have been shifts in what it's called over the years. So if we were to go back 8 years, instead of SEL, we'd probably be talking more about character education. And if you were to go back another 10 years, you'd hear a lot, and just reference that in here, tribes. Now, if you were to set all of those side by side, a lot of overlap between what students were getting in the universal. We didn't call it universal back then either. I mean, but that's what we call a lot of things today. But there'd be a lot of overlap, but partly there are some changes, but I think importantly, the names change. And I think when the names change, it makes it harder for people, like, we have an algebra class. We had an algebra class when our parents were in school. And actually, we had algebra classes when their parents were in school. But we do change the names in some of these things. And I think, I don't want to make it sound like there are no changes at all between tribes, character ed, and SEL, but a lot of consistency, but the name changes and people wonder. And I think, kind of on the mental health screener side, we've been doing in some way, shape, or form, some kind of a mental health screener since I came into the district in '99, but we don't do them in all grades every year. So as a parent, I think we get accustomed to rhythms of the school year, things that come around every year. And then with some of the mental health screeners, I mean, like the SSIS, we're administering, I think, in 4 grades. And, the SIS is fairly new to us, but before that, we had an assessment called the test. That wasn't something the students completed. That was something where teachers, assessed kids. And way back, I remember on kind of the mental health risk assessment side, and I'm drawing a blank on the name, but it was the suicide risk assessment that came out of, I think, Columbia. What was that called?
The Columbia
That's what
Depression
we use.
Screener.
Right, so that was, so again, it's infrequent, the names change, so it seems really new, and there's a lot of consistency across all of those. Now, I will say, at every point in time, we've always had families that have asked questions about certain aspects of it. So these concerns aren't new, and I think it is important, and I think, Chris and her team do a good job of doing this, about being transparent about what we're trying to do. And if there are ways we can, help understanding, we certainly want to.
I definitely see the need for that. That's why I saw, back when I got on the board before that, coming out of this pandemic, this is going to be huge, and not only for the students, exactly what I'm hearing out of the listening sessions too, the teachers, they're overloaded with dealing with some of these issues. So, I mean, I don't discount its value for sure, but you definitely have that concern of deception that people want to address.
Thank you for addressing that. So moving along, keeping us moving, the grant opportunities, we are very excited about this one. This is helping us for the next 2 years, develop some of our supports. So we have our Dane County Human Services K-12 Wellness Grant. We asked for $29,000, we got $29,000. So that will secure funding for that screener we're talking about. And as Tim mentioned, we've used screeners in the past. We shifted to this one because it has the mental health screener, and coming out of COVID, we wanted to have the social emotional wellness and the mental health piece. So we have secured funding for that for 2 school years, this year, next year. And that grant money is paying for us to increase our trauma trainers by 7. So we'll have a trauma trainer at each school and 2 at the high school. So we'll have 8 trainers total with that grant money. So that's exciting. We also got the full amount of the DPI school-based mental health grant, which is $150,000, $75,000 per year. And most of that is going for summer training for developmental design. So staff can participate in summer training opportunities. But we also have included that high school outreach clinician, which we have going on this year. It is fantastic. She's doing a lot of preventative and proactive work. She's doing PD around mental health topics with our staff at the high school. She's working closely with our student services and offering advisory drop-ins on specific topics related to mental health and stress management. She will be doing a quarterly family outreach as well around a mental health topic. So that's really exciting that we have that extra person to help our student services staff, but also to do more of that proactive preventative work. And we'll have that for the 2 years as well. And then this one is, whenever we talk about mental health or social emotional wellness, I always think it's important that we talk about where do we go? Who do we contact if we need help, if somebody's listening and they have concerns? And on the left, these are contacts we use as the student services department. These are more of the hotlines and crisis lines. But on the right, if you have a concern, we always encourage families to go through school staff to report a concern or talk about a concern, go to their primary provider for a concern. The Dane County Behavioral Health Resource Center is a newer resource. It opened this time last year. It's only been going on for a year, but they're helping all families in Dane County who contact them navigate mental health crisis, navigate mental health resources, navigate insurance issues. Like they are a great resource for our community as well and helping navigate some mental health. And before I go to the last slide, sorry, Rebecca, I do just want to add, and I know this came up a little bit already this evening. This is important for everyone, not just families worried about their child. We heard loud and clear last year during the pandemic. Families were concerned. We need our kids back in school every day. I'm concerned about mental health. We probably all navigated that within our own families, right? It was a tough year. We have some kids that came back to school 5 days a week this fall after being out virtual for 18 months, right? Our staff are reteaching the PDIS, those behavior expectations. They're teaching these people skills, the social emotional work. They're navigating kids in crisis or navigating kids who are having mental health concerns. We've done almost 20 suicide risk assessments the first 2 months of school this year. That's a lot. So we know that some kids are really having a hard time, which means I know our families are stressed and our teachers who are navigating all of this and reteaching some of these behaviors and expectations are stressed. And so I say all that just so that we remember that all of us as board members, as staff, as families, like there's support out there. And so if we're struggling, we should know, we should follow these same things as if we're worried about a child, right? Take care of ourselves and reach out because there are resources and support out there. We just need to reach out. So I always like to just say that, especially now coming in and definitely with a different feel and the needs being a little bit higher right now. And with that, I just have the last slide as a thank you and what questions might you have that we can already address throughout our time together.
Any other questions?
Oh, I just came from a listening session at one of the elementary schools, and the teachers are pressured and stuff. So I'm glad to hear that you're aware of that and reaching out, but we all are kind of responsible for finding some balance ourselves too and reaching out. So sounds like you're on the right track, and we've got good people in the schools, and it's great. Good to hear.
And, what you see, with, Chris and Kristen and Melissa and Rose is, you hear and some of the unique situations, our families, our kids, our, frontline staff are finding themselves in it when they need that additional help, whether it's with strategy or here's a student that I think is, I have some questions about. I think we need to make some connections with the family and have, a more trained set. I mean, these are the people who are working extra hard this year to make all of that happen. And, Chris, want to thank you all for coming in. This is great.
Yeah, I want to point out too, because we're going to get into academic progress and stuff, and that's a big key, but I think we have to come back to what you're saying. We're catching up for a lot of kids, and they've got a lot of catching up to do, and I think they can do it quickly, and then we'll get into more academics. But I hope we're not going to be too critical if the scores aren't the same they were in 2019. I think we've got to keep that mindset as we look at that.
I'm so glad you said that. That is so essential. And it ties right back to their mental health. It's because, and I think I said this at the listening session, we are seeing students just crashing and coming in absolute tears and saying, this is too much. I can't keep up. I can't do this. And we're seeing
At every
it
level?
over and over and over again.
So reach out and thank a teacher.
But we'll continue to work on those social emotional skills of how do you take care of yourself and that self-awareness and the self-management, right? I mean, it all ties into how do kids learn how to be resilient and how do they move forward and get help.
Yeah, you can't learn if you don't feel it.
Absolutely.
Can we ask, look, ask the question?
Sure.
Okay, I didn't know if it was appropriate or not to flag people. But with the origins developmental design, I know I'm one of the parents that was kind of concerned about some of the stuff on the website. It seems somewhat controversial. Is there any way that you said that there's staff training that was coming down, the content of that staff training could be shared in a accessible place so that parents could look at what you're transferring to the staff in training, so that we can be more confident that maybe that more controversial stuff that we see on the website that maybe you're not picking up, you know, and we can be comfortable that that's not going out.
I wonder if they would actually, I mean, we could look at even bringing them in for a family. Show a little bit of an overview of it too.
Sure.
The trainings are 4 days.
No, I mean,
I could certainly check into options we have to bring about some awareness for our families.
well, yeah, and I assume the 4 days has content and slide content. I mean, I think sharing that would be a great transparency for us to feel more.
Yeah,
Just a suggestion. I'll
yeah.
provide.
I attended the training. I didn't have access to the slides. It was all like my teacher notes that we took
Yeah.
during the
They
training.
do give resource books, which we certainly can loan out to you if you're interested in seeing some of the books that like some of the activities and things that they do practice. It's a lot of getting up and moving, a lot of engaging, getting kids in different mixes of people and groups so that they can get to know each other and. yeah,
Sure,
so-
the concern is what's being presented to staff. So that's really what would be helpful to me rather than all the other things that they just put out.
Thank
Just
you.
a suggestion. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, well, again, thank you for taking your time and sharing with us.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
This is an important topic, so
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank
you.
Thank you. Thank all.
Sorry for taking more time. than we were
Oh, no,
probably
that
slated
was-
for.
I'm all done.
We didn't want supper anyway.
Move
Oh.
forward. Hey, we're not even here an hour yet.
Yeah, well,
Thank you.
Thank you so much for
New
fielding
course
my questions.
proposals.
Yes, new course proposals. So there are 4 new course proposals this year. 3 you have today. 1 is trailing a little bit behind. It's another music one. It should come to you at November 18th. meeting. But what we have here is music workshop, digital music production, and multicultural literature. So I just kind of want to give a high level overview of each of these and then open it up for your questions. The intent of the music workshop and the digital music production courses is to provide at the high school a music course opportunity for students who might not right now be drawn into the traditional performance ensembles of band, orchestra, vocal music, and aren't in the current music tech course, which really, you might wonder what's the difference between music tech and digital music production. That course is much closer to a music theory course and a composition course than it is a production course. So that's why this. Now, with the 2 music courses, you know, as it's come through the process and as Randy and I have looked at these, you know, they're here because we recommend them for approval. However, we would note with both of the music classes, these are designed to pull more kids into the pool. So the anticipation is that we would need to increase our music staffing to accomplish this. And depending on where the kids come from, they might not all come from one area. So we don't feel confident that it would be offset automatically with reductions in staffing elsewhere. So we do see a likely budget impact with the 2 music offerings. There are some, each of them have some startup costs, more so in the digital music production, but we're less concerned about the startup costs than we are about the staffing impact. So our recommendation would be approve them so they have an approved status. But unless, if you were to agree with that and approve them, unless you directed us otherwise, we would come back to the high school and say, we don't think we want these in the course book for the upcoming year, just because the way the budget's sitting, we're not confident we can resource them next year. We might be able to the following year. We don't want kids to sign up for something and then have to go back and make a lot of hand adjustments. So that's the story on the 2 music courses. The multicultural literature course is an addition, and I want to be clear that we are not removing anything when we add this in. This is just to add another junior or senior year elective in language arts for students at the high school. It's something we've had some requests from students on over the years. We anticipate, so if you think about our English program, all kids take English 9 or 9 advanced, English 10 or 10 advanced. But then above that, there's a pretty broad swath of elective courses, and all of them run with multiple sections. So kind of our administrative thinking on multicultural literature, unlike the music, is that that's probably just going to lead to a reassortment of students within the junior and senior year electives in English, and it's probably going to be staffing neutral. So we would recommend that actually move forward this year because we don't anticipate a budget complication, but we do with the music course. So that's kind of the high level, and I'm sure you've got some questions or clarification items.
Well, I'm just looking at when the literature is going to be approved. It says 2023, second semester. Just trying to figure. What is
Right,
it? That's a
so
whole
this is a
nother-
semester course.
Okay,
We are sitting in the 21-22 school year. If this is approved, so when a course is approved, it goes in the high school course book that's readied before high school goes on winter break. When we come out of winter break in January, which is the new year, we'll begin registering kids for the and it's scary to say this,
2022.
the 2022-2023 school year. So a second semester course, which is where they're anticipating this, would be spring
Next January,
2020, January to,
a year next
Yeah,
year. Yeah,
exactly.
okay.
Thanks for clarifying that it wasn't replacing one. How come it was filled out that way? It seemed like that was the case for sure, and that's why you're clarifying.
yeah, so I mean, I think the message has come to, our building leaders very clearly. The budget situation isn't all that great. And we're gonna, be really facing some constraints. And so when Brian saw this come in, he was just in a mindset of, if this comes in, something goes off. And then when it came to, Randy's level and my level, we said, realistically, this is just gonna be a sort. And we think there are kids who are still gonna wanna take American Lit. There's no reason to reduce this. We can make this all work. So that's kind of the history there. He was approaching it, I think, from, I don't want to say an excess of fiscal caution, because you all know our budget outlook, but he was very cautious about anything that would add FTE. Randy and I think it's not going to add FTE, so that's why we made that modification.
So on the application though, it says number 8 is replace American Lit.
And then if you go down, you'll see our recommendation is approved, but existing courses shall be continued on the superintendent's directive instruction. And that's our recommendation, is this be approved with the understanding it's an addition, not a substitution.
And so is there still American novel being offered?
So American Novel was sunsetted a few years ago.
Instead, and what replaced it?
I think that sunsetted when we brought in science fiction and American Lit, but I would have to go back and check, Mark. I can have that for Monday night.
Okay, and see, the purpose of the course I support, but where are the kids getting any American literature if they take this instead of American Lit? They're not getting really a flavor for the American culture through the science fiction course. This gives us, I think, 8 different cultures from what I read,
Mhm.
which isn't a lot in terms, because it's 2 weeks. But where do we get that for the American culture? Or do we just brush that away now? Because,
So I think stepping back first, within the junior and senior electives, that's totally elective. We have no more distribution requirements in the junior and senior year. So students are going to go where their interests reside.
right,
We do have, and actually, Rebecca, I'm gonna take a moment and I'm going to email you a few things that we may want to bring up here. Because I think pretty handily I've got our reading lists.
I
We'll
was
see in a
just
moment.
looking at that, I mean, they got it in 9 and 10, which are required, I'm looking at 10 right now, which a ton of the nonfiction is. So, I mean, those are the required courses, obviously.
I can bring up what the books are at least this year. I did find them, so I'll be able to drop them too. Rebecca, should I send this to your Rebecca McDonough? You want to give us that? Okay. Subject line will be books, because I'm not taking a lot of time on the subject line. So this will come through in about a minute in Google, and then we'll just kind of pull up some of the different ones, and so you can kind of see what are actually our books in the various courses.
Could I ask a question while we're waiting that to
Yes.
come up? In the music one, the workshop,
Mhm.
is it my understanding it's keyboard, drums, guitar, and voice? Kids can choose one of those, or they get them all? Whoever was in
It's
that.
going to be all. Yeah.
So if I join, I've got to learn about drums and keyboard and voice.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah. And we're buying some guitars if we approve the course.
I'm
But
not
maybe not
joining,
for
but
now.
just in case. I
how about
want-
a drum set?
What?
You want a drum
Drum set.
set for Christmas?
I would like a drum set, yes.
Yeah, I'll give it another minute.
This
Oh,
this is really creative. This is-
There you go.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot better than
okay,
just chorus.
so I would just kind of, so this
Chorus
is
and band,
advanced English
that's all
10.
we
We're
have.
not necessarily going to get them in order, but this is what AE 10 looks like these days. And so, again, our goal with an English course, the English curriculum broadly is to start with Elizabethan, although we do the Odyssey, which is really when we get the closest to modern English, and then have a representative selection from all the periods afterwards. So this would be AE 10. And so this is the dramatic lit. And this is, okay, so English 9. This was, we read more sections of English 9 than really anything else. And so they get the Odyssey, which I grant is not American. But here are the short stories. And then they have a class read for the dystopian unit. And again, these are both American authors. So they get Hindman's Anthem, Ken Liu's Perfect Match. And then they pick for a lit circle out of one of these. And then they do Romeo and Juliet. And this is the American lit that we are retaining. This is the Brit lit. This is the English 10, which is our second most common one. So again, this has a little bit more of a nonfiction, focus, but on the fiction, we have Caesar and To Kill a Mockingbird, and then there is the poetry. And then for modern lit, and again, the goal with modern lit is no title that's older than the students taking the course. So it's very contemporary. And then science fiction, is a range. Some are American, some are not. And then the women's lit are these titles. Then AP Language Comp. And then AP Literature. And I can add these for the board book for Monday too. Or send these to, I mean, whichever if you think the whole board wants to see this, we could easily add it to board book for Monday, or I could just email it all to you so you can look at it more. If you like.
We could give it as support material, but don't necessarily have to go through it.
Yeah, we wouldn't go through. Yeah. So I mean, I kind of, as Amy said, there's going to be, I mean, there are modern titles in the 9th and 10th grade courses that all kids take, but you've got a lot of the canonical loans there, for lack of a better term. And then, I mean, if a student were to take American, and again, on a choice basis, American lit, probably dramatic lit, and actually, Lori's, women's literature, there'd be a very strong American span there, but that would be building off of the required and then what the students interest.
Again, it depends what you're taking,
Yeah.
other than the first 2 years.
Yes.
Yep. Thank you.
I think the music ones are really cool.
Mhm.
I agree, I mean, I don't know how you talk, when we have such budget problems.
I know.
It's, I mean, I know all of our kids have been in the orchestra, and I think it's just great. But this is stuff like cool.
When they talk about staff needed as 0.08, is that like one class period?
Yes. Okay. But there are these two, plus there is, the one you'll see at your next meeting is in the Springs lane. So unless we were to pick and choose taken together, that's 3.08, which becomes,
Half a person.
yeah, it adds, it becomes more significant. And that's a recurring cost, whereas when you look at some of those startup costs at one time, and then, some of the, like a guitar has a very long life, and even the digital production one, once you get that equipment, it's typically like on a 5-year replacement cycle, and becomes actually, compared to other courses, reasonably affordable.
Well, are we in a position to say we recommend these courses to the
We
board?
need to vote that we support these and move it to the board for their full approval, for board full
Based on
approval.
funding, based on budget?
Yeah.
But the concept is we approve of it.
Based on budget, what's that gonna mean, really, it's. Budget looks good.
I thought it was because Tim
mean-
said, when we can fit it into the curriculum. It might not be this year or next year even.
So the
Right.
recommendation Randy and I have,
Yeah.
is that we approve them, so we know they're on the books, the teachers know they're on the books. But we would recommend, let's not plan to run the music courses next year, just because we anticipate with
Right.
kind of fiscal leeway we have, the trends on CPI and what you're going to be looking at for staff. We're just very cautious that way. But then at our first opportunity, which probably would be the next year, we're doing it.
23, 24.
Right, bring it onto the books. That's our recommendation. I mean, if you want to, you can say, well, we'd like to see these next year, and administration will figure it out. I mean, that's always your prerogative as a board.
Yeah, I don't think we want to overstep your suggestions.
I think getting it in the book is important, so they know what's going to be there in the next spring. We don't know what the budget's going to look like that year, but we know next year is going to be challenging in the second year of this budget. And, I think it still gives life to the courses. We are looking at doing the multicultural lit next year, second semester. That's cost neutral at this time. So I would think the proposal would best be to accept the recommendations from Randy and Tim. on the music courses. And and for the approve its beginning adoption in second semester 2023.
So spell
I
it
guess
out
it'd
more
be
tightly.
24,
Yes.
second semester 24.
For lit, no, 23 for the lit class.
For the lit, but for the music, it
Music.
would be,
And that's still pending budget, though, right?
right, but here's the difference. So the music courses, we anticipate would probably run one section each. So, you know, whether you're running them with 15, 18, 20, that's one section. Most of these junior and senior year English electives run 2, 3, 4, some 18, but I think might run 5, you know, they run multiple sections. So if we were to find ourselves in a really big squeeze, it would be more like instead of running 3 sections, you'd run 2. You'd run the 2 sections a little bigger. If kids had scheduling conflicts, they would have to make choices among electives to make it all work. But when you go above 1 section for a new course, if it's in an existing content area where you expect there's going to be cross selection, there are ways to exercise fiscal control if you need to. But when you've got a course that you think is going to draw new kids into the content area, and it's a singleton, you don't have that kind of flexibility for staff and cost control.
Okay, so we're proposing that we accept the recommendation of administration to put the music ones on the books and to go ahead with the American or the literature, multicultural literature, to recommending it to the board. Right? I
You have
so
a
move.
second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. So Rebecca, for board book, just add those, can you add those? Awesome. Okay, and now we are on to our assessment data from the spring assessments, and Abby Lewis joined us towards the end of your last meeting, but Abby is a teacher at Sun Prairie. She is 6 years?
This is my 6-year teaching. Yeah.
6-year teaching. She's working on her administrative licensing. She's a graduate student at UW-Madison in their Ed Leadership Department. And she's doing her CNI practicum with us. And actually, I think this project took you over the 100-hour mark, right? So you're, I mean, the end is in sight.
The
But
Colossus.
but she's contributed a lot of really good work for us, not only in this area, but some other projects too. And so she's actually going to present, and then we'll open it up for questions later on. So
I want to know if she made the 169 pages that we were supposed to read before.
I
this
did.
meeting.
I made all of that myself.
Thank you.
Yes, I did. And I made the small one in front of you as well.
and she heard from my colleagues how much better they like Abby's slide deck than mine. But I have thick skin. So if you can bring that up, Rebecca, the presentation deck,
The small one. Yes, that one.
and take it away, Abby.
Yeah, so I guess I want to start if you have questions at any time, please feel free to stop me and ask. I do know that you had this ahead of time, and so I did just kind of want to ask you, do you want me to go in detail through each slide? Do you want me to just kind of briefly talk about it? And you have questions, we can talk about it. What would you like to do?
Do you see any overarching problems with pluses or minuses?
Yeah, do you mind going? I think it's actually the second slide. Do you mind going to the next one for me? So things to consider.
Yeah.
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 So some big positives, many students are still testing above state average. It's also really important to note that even though scores did go down during the pandemic, we are still above state average in almost everything, which is really great. And then in grades 3 through 8, many grades have around 50% of students at advanced and proficient, which is a really respectable number to be positioned at. Some challenges that we should consider as we look at this data is we had really high rates of non-tested students.
Has that always been an option not to be tested?
Yes, so non-testing has always been an option. Parents, they have to opt out, they have to contact and say, I do not want my child to be tested. And Waunakee in past years does have high rates of non-tested students. But because of the way testing was ran during the pandemic, if you recall, it was on a Wednesday when students didn't have school in the higher grades. And so they had to come in to be tested.
And there was no benefit to them. And so as we go up in the higher grades, you'll see much higher rates, like 25%, where students just did not test. And so our data is very skewed because we're missing a full quarter, right, of our student population. And so that's just, we could ask, who are those students that didn't come? Where would their numbers have fallen in other years in comparison? So that's just something to consider. And so that's just what I put on there. And also just that it was a virtual school year. And I really appreciate your comment earlier. I wrote it down that, the scores are different than they were pre-pandemic. And I think mental health probably had a really big part in how that worked. Virtual learning had a really big part of how that worked. But the data overall is still very positive in my eyes, and we are still at a really great position as a district. Did that answer your question?
If I could add, there are some concerning areas that have to be addressed, but despite those, in Dane County, we were ranked number 1 and number 2 in 2 categories and 3 and 4 in the other 2. So we're performing, compared to our constituents, reasonably well, I would say.
Yes.
And so that was nice to see.
Right, especially considering, right? Where have we been the
Yes.
last 18 months? Where have our students been?
Right,
Everything that has been going on. Yeah. We can just kind of click through if you want to, unless you have any other immediate questions.
Just more general ones like,
Oh, yeah, you're fine.
kind of going along with how they definitely, especially in the learning session from the middle school, right? Our listening session, it's not learning session. It's evident, and it's not only this district, I've heard it from other districts, the 7th grade, an incredible drop off. I don't know if you've been hearing that or seeing that, compared, like the 7th graders, they don't see it, but they were like all the teachers that came to that. And I didn't even prompt in another district, they said the exact same thing, which was really interesting. I don't know if it was that development time that they were totally out of school from, almost 2 years out, and then they came into a totally new environment. They said it's not only their academic skills, just their developmental skills in terms of how to interact with people and stuff like that. They were, it was a marked difference, like, how do we, when we say, and even some of the teachers, they felt like they're going at such a fast pace, and they just had to like slow it down for them to, grasp something instead of just rushing through the year. All these questions, I know we don't really have the answers to, but those are like, I don't know that this data points to it a little bit too, for sure.
One thing I would note is that, all kids, were out of normal school for a large chunk of time last year. We had some families that kept their students virtual all the way through. So for some kids, it is the 18-month. Middle school, 7th grade, even in normal times, kids are going through lots of transitions there. And so this just added to it. But we have a middle level educator in the room. And so, not to put you on the spot, because you were prepped to talk about this instead of what middle level education looks like, Abby, but feel free to, offer your perspective here.
Yeah, I actually teach 7th grade. And a big issue that we're seeing right now is that students emotionally, socially, academically, the last regular school year they had was 4th grade. And we are seeing them, I have 4th graders. They
look like 4th graders.
They act like 4th graders. Their academic brains are like 4th graders. They think a paragraph is 3 sentences long. And so really, like if you look across, right, K-12, there's certain times where big shifts happen. And 6th, 7th grade is a big shift, right? You're out of elementary school, you're going to different courses, you are going through physical changes, right? There's a lot happening in good old middle school. Fun memories, right? And so it definitely plays a big part in their role. And when you consider that their last regular year was 4th grade, the difference between 4th and 7th grade is staggering. And so they are struggling. That is a very real reality that lots of schools are seeing. And so I'm agreeing with you. I see it too in my classroom every day. And so trying to close those gaps and trying to build those kids back up and get them back to school, right, is a challenge.
Well, there's a big difference culturally between 5, 6, 7 school or 5, 6 school and moving into a middle school concept.
Yeah.
Structure's tighter. It's just different, and you're almost stepping into a brand new world, which they missed out on for, well, they left in a hurry,
right?
And then, so that was all of spring, and then they had until, I think it was the second semester when those levels started coming back in some form, and learning how to adapt to that isn't easy.
Yeah, exactly. I think the next slide, if I go ahead to the next one, I'm trying to remember, yeah, one more time. Like this is language arts across all grades in 2021. And so you can kind of see, growth or patterns amongst the grades. I do want to point that white is non-tested. And so if you go to 8th grade, 25% of 8th grade did not take the forward exam. So we have no data on those 25% of students. Students are still overall doing really well, right? We have really high advanced, really high proficient numbers, which is really great to see. Yeah, in this graph, it doesn't show like a big drop off necessarily in 7th grade, but definitely in 8th grade, right? So. Yeah. Do you have any more questions before I just go through? Is that okay? Let's just go. Is that okay? Yeah. So again, if we look at math, you can see 5th grade is really strong in math, or they're 6th graders now, doing really great. But again, that high tested, non-tested, we're not sure. We can go to the next one. If you look at Aspire, so this would be 9th and 10th graders at the high school thing, the ACT Aspire, that non-tested number is, really high. Really high. And so it's hard to get an accurate picture of where we are. For example, look at the English data, it looks like, oh wow, 30% of students are exceeding in English. But who are those students that aren't being tested, and where are our real numbers?
Do teachers have a sense of who didn't want to be tested?
So I think there were a few factors that came into like who didn't want to be tested. I think sometimes it was students who maybe couldn't get to school that day, right? Or they had other responsibilities. Maybe it was also students who are already high achieving students who didn't feel like they needed to take this test because they're already doing well in other things. I don't need to take this test to show that I'm doing well. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I wonder.
And I do think it was a wide, and Tim and I talked about this, it was a wide range of reasons why students didn't come in to be tested. And it was just the fact that they didn't have school that day. They didn't need to be there necessarily, right, in their mind. And so they didn't.
So these
One thing
not tested.
I would just add to
Yeah.
that is when Abby gets to the ACT data, not the ACT Aspire, but the 11th grade ACT, you'll see that our test participation rate was around 93%. So it was, 9th and 10th grade had very elevated opt-outs, not 11th grade, but the student usually gets a direct benefit.
Yeah.
The ACT gives them a score they can take and use. These Aspire scores are helpful for us, but there's no direct benefit for the student. So if I'm a high school student who's trying to balance my work, they had gotten in the rhythm, as Abby mentioned, of the asynchronous Wednesdays. And in fairness, it was not a bad day for some families to schedule appointments for either, because they wouldn't be missing class. But I think part of it is some kids felt, am I going to make up work, or am I going to sit for the test?
Yeah.
I think those are some of the things that kids thought about.
Yeah.
But I think if the non-tested kids were just average like everybody else, then the proportions wouldn't change if they've been tested, probably.
Right. The graph would look very different if those students have been tested. And I think also if we consider, referencing our conversation of mental health, right? Maybe they were like, I can't take that on, that test anxiety. So I can't do that test. Maybe that was another reason why. Yeah. Okay, so looking at ACT data. So this, if you look around the circle starting at the top, it's how many students scored in a certain band. So it's out of 36. So our highest percentages were around 20 to 23, which is a very respectable score to have. That's 27% of our students. And then 24 to 27, that would be a score on like getting into like a Big Ten school. The bottom range of those kind of expectations would be around 23%. And then that 20 to 32 is 16%. So, yeah. Thank you. And then I just wanted to compare the average composite score compared with the state of Wisconsin. And as you can tell, across all 5 years, we markedly higher than the Wisconsin average. And even in 21, both of those numbers kind of dropped a little, but we were still several points ahead of the Wisconsin average for students' ACT average composite score. Or students who met the college readiness benchmarks. So there are all 4 benchmarks in the 4 core areas looking at how they're doing. And you can just see by and large, Waunakee students are really excelling and doing a really stellar job. Even in 2021, when that number dropped, they are still a large portion of our student population who take the ACT are meeting all 4 benchmarks. If you look at AP data, this is over 5 years, looking at students, percentage of students who scored a 3 or higher, which is what you need to get the credit. Overall, above 75% or around there. Again, 2021 dropped off a little bit. This is just looking at total students tested, percentage of students tested, total number of exams taken. Basically the graph that we saw before as well. So we can keep going. I do want to include some demographic information. So when we look at the language arts forward exam, math forward exam, if we look at different races and ethnicities, how students have scored overall, you can look really quickly at the extremes on either end, right? The advanced, we have a large portion of our white and Asian students that are scoring advanced, but our Black students, Hispanic, 2 or more races are lower. We can go over to below basic and see those higher areas. And so something to consider as we have our discussions on equity and what we're doing in the classroom. This data is really important to just consider, like, what can we do to support these students to advance their learning?
This is the first time I've seen a category for 2 or more races. I think that's interesting.
Yeah, that has been around for a long time, Tim, right?
Yes.
2 or more races, yeah. It's been called other things that aren't really appropriate words to use anymore, but 2 or more races is a fairly common addition. And then looking at economically disadvantaged, these would be low income students, students who qualify for free or reduced lunch. On the top, that's their score breakdown, and then the bottom, students who are economically advantaged. So again, looking at the below basic difference, the advanced difference, just noting that, you know, they are at a different position than students who are not economically disadvantaged. If we look at math, we see similar kinds of trends. It's important to consider this information as we look at our curricula, what we're doing to support our students. Equity is a huge discussion right now. And this is just really important to consider as we move forward into this year and following years of what can we do to support all students and make sure that all students are getting the education that they need to grow and improve. Again, similar trends for math for economically disadvantaged. And then I have ACT Aspire testing. I would like to point out on this graph, I was very impressed with the percentage of exceeding for the ELA ACT demographic breakdown. They're really great numbers to see. Again, because it's high school and on the other graph as well, you don't have to go back, but that really high non-tested rate. So if we look at the bottom one of not economically disadvantaged students, we're around 35% who tested exceeding. However, we're also at around 35% for non-tested. So we don't have a true sample of where our students are, unfortunately. And then math. This also to your previous question of who isn't being tested. You can see here, there are certain groups that didn't come in for testing. I don't have enough data to make, you know, an assumption about why certain groups didn't come in to take tests, but it's just something to note and keep track of moving forward. Yeah, we go to the next ones as well. So similar trends of students overall are doing really well. We have really high rates of exceeding or ready, proficient. Those really the place we want our students to be, but also on the other side, recognizing really high rates of non-tested, especially the higher up in grades that we go, and then just the data that we're missing, we're not sure. So this graph is kind of a lot to look at, but it's looking at that ACT composite score, so the overall score out of 36, looking at it over time for different races. So you can, I'll let you look for a minute. So trends that I notice as I look at this graph is our white students are doing really well. I can count on every single year that our white students are going to perform and perform well. But when we look at maybe our Hispanic Latinx students or to our more race students, Asian students, sometimes they're not always as successful. I think that is my last graph. Yeah. What questions do you have
What
about
does
this
that
data?
no response mean?
Oh, can you go back?
They didn't say their race or what?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
that's what that means. They're not required on the ACT to disclose their race if they don't choose to.
Right, so this is
Yes.
an administrative difference for the Aspire and the Forward. Those are computer-based assessments. So our student information system every night for reporting purposes sends a bunch of information up to DPI. DPI has all of, so every student, if you think about an enrollment form, and Ted, you may have had the opportunity to do this, you have to indicate a bunch of information about your student. And some of these areas, if the family doesn't complete a section, then our staff, to the best of their ability, has to fill it in. So there's no gaps. And so that's all administrative data. There's no gaps in the data. The ACT is part of the statewide assessment system, but in all other respects, it's like the ACT you take on a Saturday. It's still a paper pencil test. We have a day where the forms come in and we have the juniors bubble in all their information. So one, kids can choose not to bubble something in, and it's not the main administrative data, so you could have a gap. Secondly, and we catch it before this data comes out, sometimes kids will put in the wrong number for their school district, and then we, have an Abbotsford kid, or they have one of our kids, and we clean it up during the data quality period. But that's why you see that.
What questions do you have about this data?
It's a good report. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time and for allowing me to share this work with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Abby, for your excellent work. We enjoyed working with you very much.
Thanks.
Great
And I'm
job.
going to you too.
Very clear. Okay, next agenda is future meeting items.
Yes, so for your next meeting, which is just 2 weeks away, on November 16th, the state releases the report cards. And so these are the main accountability measures the state of Wisconsin has for schools and districts. They are released on the 16th. So we will, I really don't like to add attachments to board book on a rolling basis. But this will be the one time this year that will happen. We'll release board book before the 16th for your meeting on the 18th. But then when we get our state report cards on the 18th, we will add them to board book and let you know. So we'll be covering that. We'll have that update on DEI partnerships and the proposed reporting tool as we have discussed. And then there'll be that fourth report proposal, which is an orchestra proposal. And that will be your November 18th.
Okay.
Questions?
Is the reporting tool being brought up at all on Monday, or we wait until after?
It'll come up
This will be the first that
here,
we'll see
and then
it.
it can come to the full board in December.
Is there any item anyone would like to add to the agenda?
Looks like a good one. Can't wait.
Then we need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
And I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
It's very painless.
Thank you, Rebecca.